Welcome to episode 5 of Genealogy AI Face-Off. Today we're exploring one of AI's most powerful capabilities for genealogists, identifying patterns and connections across multiple documents that humans might easily miss. We're using the same prompt for our two tools, ChatGPT and Claude, and here is the focus for today. Identify patterns and potential connections in Thomas Hugh Savage's story that warrant further investigation. Chat has come back with a neatly arranged set of patterns and potential connections. There were recurring themes of migration, resilience, and occupational continuity. Several historical and familial connections that could provide deeper insights into his story. And then it proceeds to give me those patterns. A little bit about work in the railway industry in which his father was involved. And questions such as these potential connections to investigate. Second, migration and economic pressures leading to the emigration pattern. The timing of his migration, and potential connections to investigate. For instance, did Thomas travel alone or with family members? Passenger lists from Quebec immigration records might indicate if he travelled with siblings or extended family. Next, family loss and its impact on migration, and some follow-up connections, such as, did his wife's death in Quebec influence his later movements? The cross-continental family networks pattern and potential connections, such as, did he maintain ties to relatives back in Wales or England? Looking for letters, obituaries, or local records would indicate ongoing contact. And then number 5, choice of final residence, especially after his wife's passing in Quebec in 1955. Potential connections. Why did Thomas settle in Clinton, Ontario, specifically? Pattern recognition is where artificial intelligence truly excels. AI can quickly analyse multiple data points across various documents and spot relationships that might not be immediately obvious to us. Have a look at how Claude went with this prompt. Same prompt, and then comes back with a set of analysed patterns and potential connections. A different layout and some different findings and different research opportunities. I especially like some of these from Claude today. Under the first heading of the missing years and geographic movements, I wondered also, how did he and Emily meet in Toronto? And how did his transition from farm labour to printer happen? And further down, in the 1948-55 period, why was Emily in Noranda, Quebec when she died? And especially, what circumstances brought her to this mining town far from Toronto? And we'll find out a little bit more about this as we unravel the mystery. Occupational transitions was of particular interest to me, especially as I did a little bit more digging when I found an address listed for Thomas and Emily on their return to Ontario in 1933. I'll get that document for you. Here's the Canadian Government Canadian Immigration Service document. The passengers were sailing from Liverpool to Quebec. And this is in 1933. At the bottom of this record, I can see, not all that clear, but the last two entries are Thomas Savage and Emily Savage. Thomas from Penally in Wales and Emily from Blackrod in England. And in this column, it mentions their destination as Noranda, Quebec. Further investigation drew me across to the right-hand side where I could see the actual address of where they were returning to. Their home is listed here as 242 8th Street, Noranda, Quebec. Now that's an important factor in the next part of my project. My further investigations came across this document, which is a PDF about a place in Quebec called Noranda, and in particular, the location 8th Street. And apparently, Noranda's commercial buildings were in this street. And on the left-hand side, you can see a map. You can see 8th Street here, which would be the commercial area mentioned in this document. And this is in the early 1940s and 30s. So that gave me pause to think this couple were relocating to a brand new commercial area of this mining town. And this document is actually an historic interpretive tour of old Noranda. A great find, but a lot of reading. So my next stop was to go back to Claude and ask for a summary of the content of this Noranda brochure, which you see here. And it's come up with an interesting and short version of the content of that document. And what struck me here was that in number 2, the mining operations, the Horn mine had become Quebec's largest mine and one of the world's largest. It was in 1937 ranked 2nd and 3rd globally for copper and gold production. So this is right in that area and era for Thomas to be operating in his capacity as a hostman in that particular mine. And I then wanted to find out a little bit more about two aspects from the brochure: the housing areas for mine managers and miners, and in that special address that was noted for the Savage family on their passenger list. And it told me a little bit more about the housing areas in Noranda and a special notation about their location on 8th Street and its proximity to the Noranda Hotel. I took that another step further forward. What was the role of a hoistman in mining operations, especially mentioning his role in 1933? And it comes back with an interesting collection of details about the job of a hoistman, sometimes called a hoist operator or cage tender. He was responsible for operating the mine's hoisting system, essentially the vertical transportation system that moved workers, equipment, and ore between the surface and underground mining levels. And this was one of the most trusted and responsible positions in the mining operations. Clues now as to what Thomas Savage's life was like if he worked for this particular mine, as I'm beginning to think he probably did. So with all of that information in place, I went further forward with Claude. As I'd mentioned before, this was of interest. So did the family move to Noranda for employment reasons? It's becoming quite obvious now from the records that it has analysed for me that this was the case. So I have solved one part of the query involved in my prompt and looking at the reasons why Thomas and Emily were in Miranda in 1955. Was Thomas employed there as a hoistman? I'm pretty sure he was. So perhaps I need to look deeper now at death records and obituaries to find more details about not just Emily's passing, but also for Thomas. It gives me ideas at the end of this response from Claude about research strategies. For example, employment records from mining companies, printing establishment or union records. So I have now begun to locate some of those records online. Many other research strategies mentioned, or some of the other connections that I'm keen to explore now, especially regarding the death of his mother and looking into asylum records for Martha Elizabeth treatment. And of course, this one, which I have recently done, is the mining company archives. So what it's doing here for me is giving me ideas and locations where I might go to find out more about my ancestors. Some practical tips for you if you are following along. Use AI to find patterns or find research questions. When you're asking the AI to identify patterns in your genealogical data, provide all relevant documents, even if they seem unrelated. Such was the case with that passenger list or immigration record that I showed you. Ask specifically about name patterns, geographic movements, occupational changes, and social connections. Then request that the AI suggest potential explanations for those patterns. And most importantly, at the end, use the patterns to generate new research hypotheses. Recognition demonstrates the unique value AI can bring to your genealogy toolkit. In our next video, we'll explore how Claude and ChatGPT can help with research planning, developing those strategies to fill the gaps in your family history. See you then.